Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Risk, Awareness, and Opportunity, Social Media, Food, and the Passionate Consumer. We have two speakers joining me today. The first is Linda Eatherton, Global Director of Food and Beverage Practice at Ketchum. And our second is Hannah Godfrey, Director of Food and Beverage at Brandwatch. So we definitely encourage you today, during the course of the session, to be interactive. We have a hashtag for the session. It's Brandwatch Tips. We would love your participation, so please tweet at us at Brandwatch or at Ketchum PR, as well as ask sessions in the session chat. We will be answering questions at the end in the last few minutes, last 15 minutes or so. We will also be recording today's session, and we'll make a copy of the download and the recording of the webinar available to you within a day or so after the event. So coming up for our session today, we will be covering Food 2020, the consumer as CEO, and then talking a little bit about defining the market, mitigating risk, and uncovering opportunities. So with that, I will turn it over to our first speaker, Linda.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm thrilled to be here with Hannah. This is a great session, and we encourage your participation either online or offline. We want to answer those questions and keep the dialogue going even after this presentation. First, I want to tell you a little bit, sort of a backdrop to what Hannah's going to be sharing about some proprietary research that we at Ketchum have been doing since 2008. For those of you who are not familiar with Ketchum, we are a global, international, integrated consumer and business communications firm that has been operating over 90 years. We operate 100 offices in 70 plus countries on 6 continents. And the reason I share that with you is of those 90 years, a good 6 decades, has been devoted to the food space. And with that kind of footprint and that kind of knowledge and background, we feel very passionate about being able to bring forward-thinking insights to our clients and to those we work with around the world. So today we're sharing with you some just headlines from our most recent Food 2020 Consumer as CEO research. Again, proprietary research that looks ahead, looks beyond what others are looking at. The most important piece of the research is predicated on the knowledge that we all know, and that is there's been an enormous power shift in the marketplace. When we became a more socialized, digitized world through information and technology, we ceded power to the individual. Literally, every single individual out there with a laptop or with a computer or with a handheld device is not only a citizen journalist, but is also a citizen activist. And this changes the way we go to market. It changes our go-to-market strategies, and it changes our marketing capabilities. What we needed to do with Food 2020 was identify how this was changing and how it would continue to change what we do in our marketing, in our communication, and in our business environment. One of the most amazing pieces of this is we put the consumer in charge in this research. We asked them questions that basically started with, if you were CEO of a major food concern that operated around the world, what would you do? How would you decide? And in this piece of research, most recently in 2013 and 14, we identified a cohort that we had not seen before. And that's what I want to spend a little time today sharing with you. This cohort, this group of consumers, we call the food evangelist. Let me share what we know about them. Basically, our research was psychographic research, not demographic research. Now, I want to emphasize that we try to do research that no marketing organization or business organization would do, specifically because we can and because it gives us a unique and different perspective. So our research is psychographic. It is also directional, not definitive, but it did cover 6 different areas of the world, and what we found were some very consistent and revealing pieces of information. In general, we divided the population worldwide into 3 basic categories. the general consumer who basically just eats to live and has very little interest in food. The food involved is what we would consider to be the core consumer targets that most food companies are marketing to today. These are people who love food. They love what you sell. They love everything you do. And they're eager to receive your advertising and your marketing messages, and many of them respond to it with great excitement, and they share. They're good at sharing information on and offline. What we found is there's a group inside that food involved group. They're passionate, but we call them food evangelists. Now, to go back, the food involved, we would call an information seeker and sharer. She is basically very good at looking for information and sharing information. Again, it's somewhat passive. It's active in that they're good at sharing, but they're pretty comfortable with what they have and what they see. But let me tell you about the food evangelist. The food evangelist, which represents about half of the food involved population, are actually very different. These are individuals who are not comfortable with just sharing. They are pushing out their opinions 4+ times per week, online and offline, about specific food issues and topics. I use this image on this slide very intentionally to describe who they are and who they are not. They are not activists. They are not part of NGOs or connected to NGOs. They are not connected to each other. And they are not that crazy small percentage of people who will never be satisfied. These are truly, truly passionate people who love food and care deeply about the many different aspects of how food is produced and packaged and brought to market that concern them. They have real concerns. They're good people with really legitimate concerns, and they believe that their questions are not getting answered. What we have found, however, is if they feel they are being dismissed or they're not being heard about issues that are incredibly important to them, they will aggregate, they will activate, and they will pressure for change. Once they receive the change they need and want, they will disband and disperse and move on to something else. So they don't have a singular agenda. I think of them, if you want to go on to the next slide, as people who think it is their God-given role in life to be literally an agent of change. They're looking to push out their opinion and direct other people to follow them, to do what they do, to think what they think. This is a very unique behavior type, and we believe it is the single most powerful behavior and cohort that is changing perceptions about food in good ways and in some places not good ways. I did tell you it was a psychographic research, but there is a demographic breakdown that I want to share with you. What we've learned is something very fascinating. As opposed to the food involved or your core consumer, this is a more young audience, 48% under 35 years old. Now we know many are female and parents, and that makes a great deal of sense because they're basically the gatekeeper for a lot of food choices in a household. But what was really surprising to us is that their income is well above average. They're highly educated people. And here is where it gets really interesting. Not only are they well educated and better able than most to make food choices, they are the most misinformed group of individuals on the planet. And there's a reason. What we're seeing is that the food evangelist around the world is extremely worried, if you could go back one, extremely worried about food processing, about packaged foods, about prepared foods. And in many countries, this is having a significant impact on sales. I can tell you in the States that the packaged prepared foods industry is facing the most serious challenge it has ever faced, with continually declining sales in many, many parts of their market. This is basically an erosion that started many years ago. But this concern about anything that is processed, and by the way, processing is their term, not our term, anything that just doesn't look like it should straight from the ground or from the animal, then they have concerns about it. And we can move on to the next slide. I said earlier that they represent a small portion of the population. They're only about 22% of the global population, but when you think of it, they're too small to market to, but they're too large to be ignored. If we could look at the next slide, which I think is really interesting. This particular slide I want to spend just a moment on. When we looked in different parts of the world, what we found is a much higher incidence of evangelism in some countries than in other countries. And there are many, many theories as to why this is. Remember, I told you this was directional, not definitive. What we did was we asked our incredible research network, which works around the world, to run cross-calculations against available data sets to see if we would see any correlation between this incidence of evangelism in other parts of the world. And it actually gave us a clue. And if you could move to the next slide, this was fairly interesting. There seems to be a direct correlation between the use of an incidence of use of smartphones and the incidence of evangelism. So what we're thinking is that this is a group that is really notable because they're urgent. Everything they do is very, very urgent, and they spend most of their time on platforms like Twitter, WeChat, Instagram, Pinterest. They're not casual bloggers, and they're not actually operating blogs in many cases. This is all about radioing to their people. Make a decision, do something differently, do it now. And I use this slide as a generic slide that I want to just caution. It's sort of the cautionary tale here. While we have tons and tons more information we could share, I want you to hear from Hannah here in a minute. The most important takeaway for you is that they, we believe, are very definitely actively at work recommending, endorsing, and directing consumers, your consumers. And many of the marketing research programs that I have seen all around the world flag that friends and family are the most important references for making food choices. We believe that the food evangelist is actively working in the friends and family community to change what people do, what people think, and what people say and feel about food. Remember that a good portion of their influence, their conversation, their work is online. And these are people that are highly, highly skeptical of advertising, of marketing, of traditional communications. They are looking for companies and brands to build personal relationships with them. And you don't do that with a website, but you can develop relationships and be a good listener and become a real partner with this individual through different social techniques. Today, Hannah is going to tell you a little bit about how these individuals work online, how we can track them, and how other companies are listening, and some of the tools that we have to get closer to not only the food evangelist, but also your core consumer. Hannah, if you want, you can go forward. I think we need to move on to Hannah here quickly.
Sure. Thanks, Linda, and hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Godfrey, and I lead food and beverage here at Brandwatch. We work with many companies in the food, beverage, and agriculture industry, such as PepsiCo, Whole Foods, Papa John's, Jack in the Box, all the way through to large global CPG firms. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to expand on the excellent research that Linda has just taken you through that Ketchum's been doing about the Food 2020 and talk about how the importance of social listening being a mechanism to be able to get on top of this for your brand. Firstly, I'm going to talk about defining the market. How can we use social listening to define our market landscape and mitigate risk online? I'm also going to talk about how social listening can be used to find opportunities. It's not just risk that all of this conversation creates, there are huge opportunities for brands as well. So firstly, let me give you a little bit of background. I've been working in social analytics at Brandwatch for nearly 5 years now, and during this time, I've worked with companies across a lot of different types of verticals. Brands in the food and beverage and hospitality and agriculture industries were always my favorite because these brands are passion brands. Food and drink is emotive. People, food evangelists, food involved, everyone really cares what they eat, how it's produced, and the ingredients that these foods contain. What that results in is billions and billions of conversations happening every single day online about different foods, drinks, brands, and issues. All of this conversation can be a huge advantage if leveraged correctly, but it can also pose serious threats for some brands. So some of the things that you see on the screen here right now are some of the hot topics in the industry that a lot of our clients are using social listening platforms like Brandwatch to monitor. Things like heart-healthy, gluten-free, sustainability, all the way through to more fun trends like the ramen burger, craft beer, and kale. As Ketchum demonstrated in the Food 2020 research, these trends are rearranging grocery store shelves. Before they can do this, though, they are first created and driven by the consumer. Like food evangelists, these consumers create trends at the speed of light. It's so fast. They're empowered by the speed and the reach of social media. Brands need to be able to react quickly to this constantly changing consumer preferences. But this is not easy. How can they do this? Well, by using social listening to understand consumer motives and then using that insight, they can create stronger brand-consumer relationships and more informed marketing strategies. One example of this here that I'm going to take you through is the health trend. So we've seen this has been a big trend for a while now. What we can do using social listening is actually dive into what consumers' motives are for eating healthily. So a deeper analysis using Brandwatch of conversations indicating the intent to eat healthily here. So what we've done is we've created a query for people saying, I want to, I'm going to, I'm aiming to eat healthier, better, cleaner. So we can narrow down this subset of conversation. And then once we've captured that conversation, we can mine it for people's motives. So what this shows us here is when people talk about eating healthily online or intending to eat healthily online, 12% of this discussion focuses around body image. So what we can see from that is the underlying motive for eating healthily is an ideal body. For a smaller group here, the association is with exercise. Interestingly enough, when we dive into this data, what I found was temptation foods. So that's things like pizza. Pizza actually made up half of the whole conversation about temptation foods, is a leading topic. So what that means is that emphasizes the consumer's desire to eat healthily, but their internal struggle to actually do so because they're discussing these temptation foods. So this here is a practical example of how we can use social listening to complement Ketchum's Food 2020 research in a practical sense to understand the consumer's interests. And then by doing this, once we know these consumer interests, brands in this industry can better position marketing efforts to align with them. We can also dive into this demographically. So when we looked at this conversation, we can see that most of the people talking about eating healthily online are women. We can split it up by different food groups and trends. So also, most of the people who talk about kale are women, but interestingly, the conversation about bacon is pretty evenly split. So how can we actually use this information? Well, we all know that certain social channels appeal more to certain demographics. For example, we know that the majority of people who use Pinterest are women. So if I'm a company trying to position a new health food, or if I am an existing company in this health food space and I want to increase my competitive share of voice in this market, I should be thinking about my Pinterest strategy. So we know who these people are interested in the health trend, what their interests are, but how about where? We can also break this data down geographically. So here, what you should be seeing on the screen, if there's not too much of a delay, is that we break the data down by state in the United States. And we can see the green area being kale, the red being bacon. And what we can see is that kale is a much stronger contender in the Northeast and the West of the United States than in the South and Midwest. So why this is useful is that we know that states that favor kale may also welcome other health foods. So many of us as marketers, we have regional content. This could be on a national level like we're looking at here, or it could be global. So we could also do this same type of analysis country by country. Therefore, what we're going to do is get a better sense of consumers' needs and consumers' concerns and wants on the local level. We actually published this. We have a report, the food and beverage report that we published last summer. And when we published it, Bloomberg actually picked this graph up. They really liked it. And they liked it so much that they named it the United States of Bacon and Kale. And they overlaid political data with this and compared it to the 2012 US election night map. So the assumptions that they were pulling from it here was that they saw that 17 of the top 23 kale states voted for Obama in 2012, and Romney won in 11 of the 13 bacon states. So the reason why I include this here is because actually it's something that our clients are doing quite frequently, and that's overlaying social media data across other types of data sets. In this case, it's political voting data, but it could be weather data. It could be internal data sets like sales data. When you lay that on top of social data, what you get is context, and that's what can be really important. We all know that seasonality is super important for brands in food and beverage. So this example here that we're looking at is of Starbucks, who every year at the very start of summer in May, they do an annual Frappuccino happy hour. What they do is they go onto Twitter and they do hashtag Frappuccino happy hour, and they do half-price Frappuccinos in May. What this does is this successfully positions Starbucks as the iced beverage of summer. They know that right at the start of summer, people are getting excited about the warm weather and the prospect of the summer to come. And Frappuccinos are ideally positioned right there to capture a significant portion of this seasonal market. And as you can see from the graph on your screen, they successfully managed to increase their share of voice during this period, but also maintain a high share of voice compared to some of their competitors in the space. We can also get very granular with this type of data as well. So we can look at things like timing. The graph that we're looking at here compares the volume of tweets by hour just during one day. And we're looking at tweets from people intending to eat healthily, and then tweets that health grocers are pushing out. So what this shows us is the time that these consumers with healthy eating intentions are online. They're tweeting most between 3 p.m. and 9 p.m., so mid-afternoon and mid-evening. This is all in Eastern Standard Time. But what's really interesting is tweets from health grocers are peaking from 11 a.m. to 12 noon Eastern Time. So they're missing out on that opportune time to engage with their target audience. So during this past section, what we've been able to demonstrate is how social listening can be used to profile consumers driving a trend like the health trend, who they are, when they're most active online, where they are, their interest areas, and their struggles. Understanding this creates huge opportunities for us as marketers to be more relevant, to better position our products and our marketing strategies. Now, however, all of this conversation online also creates risk. So what I'm going to do in the next section is I'm going to talk about how social listening can be leveraged in a practical sense to mitigate this risk and get to the opportunity. Especially in light of the rising health trend, many food and beverage companies have faced an onslaught of criticism for their products' ingredients, production methods, and nutritional values. With social media, as Linda explained through the Food 2020 research, this is amplified. Food evangelists have the power to influence government policy, to influence businesses. It is not just food evangelists that cause risk. There are other groups too. Just as this fast food company experienced recently when this photo was posted onto their Facebook page. They're not alone. This happens all the time. There was the case last year of Barilla, the pasta manufacturer's CEO, made a statement about how their pasta is for straight families and they would not use a gay family in the adverts. Burger King's Twitter handle was hacked and taken over last year and rebranded as McDonald's by one very imaginative hacker. This type of thing happens all of the time. And in this industry, there are a few very loud voices with very large followings. I'm sure many of you already know who this is. If you don't, her name is Vani Hari. She calls herself the Food Babe online. She's an extremely influential food blogger, and she's made it her mission to rid products of harmful ingredients. Her strategy has been going directly to the brands themselves using social media. She, for our international audiences here, operates principally in the US, but she is starting to have an international reach. She's a passionate consumer who wants to change or impact the way food is grown, raised, packaged, and sold.
And Hannah, if I may interrupt, one thing to remember about people like Food Babe, and there are many of these individuals online, this is not the food evangelist. This is an individual who is out to make a name for herself. Her motives are purely her self-interest, whereas a food evangelist, their motive is truly on behalf of their family, their community, their world. Something to keep very clear as you think about who you're listening to and how you're listening.
Yes, exactly. So the reason why I bring up Food Babe here is because she comes up time and time again. A lot of our clients here at Brandwatch are wanting to be able to listen to people like her, but also listen to food evangelists and other consumers as well. So that's one of the things that you should be able to do in a social listening platform like Brandwatch, is identify these people who are pushing out opinions about issues in this industry. They're pushing out opinions about GMO, about ingredients, about lots of different things to do with food and beverage. Being able to capture them and have them stored in your system and listen to what they say is super important. One of Food Babe's latest campaigns was just a couple of days ago, and she targeted General Mills and Kellogg's about having an ingredient called BHT in their cereal in the US. And what I would like to do is actually just point out an example that happened a little while before that one of a company called White Wave Foods, and Food Babe targeted them for having an ingredient called carrageenan in their products. And along with others like Trader Joe's, they were named by Food Babe and her hashtag Food Babe Army because of having this ingredient in their products. What White Wave did was they managed to successfully take this criticism, take this risk, and turn it around. They found the opportunity in the risk here. They announced that in 2015, they're going to be dropping carrageenan from all of their food products. Now, I realize that not all brands in this industry are in a position to be able to rapidly make huge changes to their products like White Wave did. However, what everyone can be doing is listening to consumer concerns in this market and using the insight to influence messaging, content, packaging, and positioning to line up with those concerns. So social listening really allows you to take control of these outcomes before people like Food Babe get the better of you. But what ingredients should we be paying attention to? How do we know? Well, we can also use social listening for this, to be able to gauge the level of controversy around certain ingredients. So sweeteners are a hot topic, and what you should be now seeing on the screen is some analysis we did around 4 different types of sweeteners. What we can see from this is that the volume of conversation relating to aspartame is much higher than any of the other types of sweetener. And most of this conversation focuses around the health aspects of the sweetener rather than legal or taste. When we zoom into this, using sentiment analysis, we can see that this is overwhelmingly negative. People are pushing out opinions about aspartame being bad for your health. Stevia, on the other hand, there is not as much conversation, but this conversation is overwhelmingly positive. And this information is actually coming from the group that Ketchum identifies as the food informed. So they're not as big of a group, but they are very influential and they're opinion leaders in this space. When we talk to our clients here, or I talk to my clients here at Brandwatch about managing risk and crisis preparation, we like to think of it as the known versus the unknown. Every company out there has issues that you're already going to be aware of, and therefore you can somewhat prepare for. So that's issues like ordering a meal, problems with products, product recalls, certain polemic ingredients. But on the flip side, there's also always going to be things that you cannot predict for. Things that come up from nowhere in the middle of the night, and by the morning, they've seriously damaged your brand's reputation. Social listening can actually help with both of these things. Firstly, preparing for the known is the easy part. All social listening platforms should be able to segment data so that mentions online, tweets, Facebook posts, blog posts, whatever they may be, to do with certain subcategories should be automatically routed to the right person. For example, if somebody tweets about having an issue ordering their food, that should be routed in real time to the customer service representative responsible for that local restaurant. Preparing for the unknown is more difficult, but it's also possible. Systems that we use are things like increases alerts. So for example, if conversation about my brand online rises over a certain percentage of my normal daily conversation average, then send me an email, let me know. It could be something awesome and one of your pieces of content really taking off and getting a lot of love, but on the other hand, it very easily could not be. Either way, you probably want to know about it. Your social listening platform should be sifting through all the noise out there and helping you filter down to what's really important. One quick trick that I'll let you in on that our clients like to do is filtering these alerts. So for example, if somebody with over 10,000 followers talks about my brand on Twitter and the sentiment is negative, then let me know right away. This is going to capture these food evangelists, capture these influencers right away. So you're going to be able to be on top of the issue. I'm going to talk through a very,
I'm sorry, Anna. I would also say that not only on top of the issue, but tracking and listening to what their conversations sound like. If they are having an issue, for example, about how an ingredient is sourced and where you've sourced the ingredient, or they don't understand why you are not revealing the source of the ingredient, this begins to form what we call here in the States a drumbeat of concern. And as you watch and listen, pay attention to why they're asking the question. Why does it matter to them? Why do they need to know? It's the why behind the concern and the question that will reveal to you how to bridge the gap between information and science and comfort and trust.
And an example here of a very quick case study that I'm going to walk you through is Chobani an American brand of yogurts, actually it had to initiate, it was subject to one of these situations last year when it had to initiate a recall of its yogurt cups because they had received a lot of complaints about mold in the yogurts. Nightmare situation for any brand, but it does happen. So how did they react? They reacted quickly. They acknowledged the issue on all of their social media channels with a direct comment from their CEO. They created a blog and they started updating all of their followers on the issue in real time. By doing this, they were exposing themselves to risk, more risk. They were opening themselves up to negative feedback. But because of the way they opened themselves up to this, they dealt with it with honesty and transparency. And in that, the result is now Chobani is lauded as a leader in social media strategy, and they provide excellent customer service and timely responses. So these nightmare situations do happen, but there are lots of ways that you can prepare for them. I'm going to move on now and talk about how social listening can be used to uncover opportunities. And I'm going to specifically focus on how unbranded analysis in a social media listening platform can be used to uncover opportunities. The reason why I'm focusing on this is because I feel all of us on the line right now already probably know how to do basic social listening. By basic social listening, I mean, how do consumers feel about my brand and my products versus the competition? What is the sentiment, etc. I'm not saying that is not useful. It is very useful. And if anybody would like more information on that type of social listening, we have a lot of resources on our blog. And of course, we're happy to connect offline after this call. But the problem that I have a little bit with that type of social listening is that you are asking a closed question. When you create a query in a social listening platform, you ask, what do you think of my brand? You're going to get that answer. However, when you open it up and look more generally at a topic or an industry, that's where the insight really lies. You're thinking outside of the box and you're going to get the unexpected. I'm now going to talk you through a practical case study of unbranded analysis. Continuing on with this health trend theme, I'm going to talk about Greek yogurt. So, the reason I've picked Greek yogurt is because it's a very competitive landscape. It's a crowded market space. The Greek yogurt wars of today have been compared to the soda wars of Coke versus Pepsi of the past. And Greek yogurt was just a single digit of the US yogurt market in 2007, but now it accounts for over 28% of this $7 billion industry. So, and the photo that we're looking at on the screen is actually New York City. It's a block in Soho. For any of you there, you might recognize it, although it's probably covered in snow right now. There is a Chobani pop-up yogurt store on one corner, and then Yoplait has their hashtag Taste Off campaign, which is where they did blind tastings of their yogurt versus Chobani. So this is just showing that it's a very competitive industry. Brands are trying to find any way they can with their social media strategies that they can gain share of voice and product positioning in this market. Using social listening, we can look at what brands appear in the conversation. So what we did was we created a query looking at Greek yogurt conversation, and we can see that nearly 50% of the time when people talk about Greek yogurt, they're mentioning Chobani. This is interesting, but what's way more interesting to me is that 63% of the time when people talk about Greek yogurt, they're not actually talking about brands at all. Believe it or not, consumers don't always care about you. They care more about the actual product or thing that you're making. And this is where the real insight lies. It's in the unbranded conversation, or the white space, as I often refer to it. On this graph, it could be seen as the pink space, as it's the pink section of the graph. This white space, this unbranded conversation, is really where the insight lies. It's where you find ideas. Ideas are not living in your brand mentions. That's where everything you already know lives. The white space is the unknown. I'm going to tell you a very brief story about a client that we worked with a few years ago now, but it's very relevant because this company makes cream cheese. And in the past, cream cheese is associated with being smothered on a bagel. And it tastes really good being smothered on a bagel, but they were interested in using social listening to find out if people were using cream cheese in other ways. So using social listening, what they were able to find out is that people were talking a lot in blogs and forums and on Twitter, but mainly actually this insight came from blogs and forums, about using cream cheese in pasta sauce, using cream cheese for cooking, in cheesecakes. And what they actually did was they created a whole new line of products based on this insight. So that's just a very quick case study of how social listening can be used in product development even. And they've had great success with this new product line. Getting back to Greek yogurt. Greek yogurt is a rising trend. However, it's now starting to decline. So what we can do is we can look at this over time. We're looking at 2 years worth of historical data here, and we see that conversation about Greek yogurt first starts to rise in September 2013. And when we dig into that, it's actually because it's named as a fat-burning food. It then reaches its peak during February 2014, but now it's actually starting to trail off. Why is that? We can look at the topics of conversation here. So Greek yogurt is heralded for its health benefits, for being a fat-burning food, for being gluten-free. People talk a lot about eating Greek yogurt for breakfast with oatmeal. Greek yogurt peanut butter smoothies were a huge hit this last year. So lots of people were sharing recipes. So how this can help us is really with the ideation behind content creation. So if I'm a company in this space and I'm launching a new Greek yogurt brand, or I want to take over a bit more share of voice of the Greek competitive, crowded Greek yogurt market, I can use this. Maybe I want to create a recipe, a breakfast recipe around Greek yogurt with oatmeal, because I know that's a popular topic. So this is the what. How about the audience? How about the who? Oh, sorry, before we move on to the who, what we have here is we can also look at the issues around that. So people are also quite worried, and this is a much smaller group of people. They live mainly in blogs and forums, but they're worried about the Greek yogurt's environmental impact, because apparently there is an acid wave that runs off when Greek yogurt is produced, and it's toxic and can kill fish in streams and things like that. So that's something that you're going to want to be aware of as a brand in that space. So now, where are our target audience? So like most topics, conversations dominated on Twitter and Facebook, but there's also a lot of conversation going on in more niche blogs and forums. And that's actually where you can find a lot of insight. We can see Pinterest coming up in the top sites here, as well as Weight Watchers and fitness sites as well. So here we can look at communities in more depth. So we're looking at obesity help and weightwatchers.com being two big communities. So tying this back to Ketchum's 2020 research, keeping tabs on these influencers doesn't just have to be for reputation management. What we've got here is we've got a lot of people talking about the benefits of this product. These people, if you can get them on your side and make them a brand advocate, they're going to be doing your job for you on social. Lastly, we can also look at when they're online. So again, this is going to help us with planning our content and timing when we engage online. So we can see that conversation about Greek yogurt spikes midweek and it drops at the weekends. So today, what I have spoken to you about is we've looked at how social listening in a practical sense complements research like Ketchum's 2020 research, and how we can use social listening to define what is our market, who is in our market space, who are the influencers, who are these food evangelists, how can we find them using a social listening platform and keep tabs on them, and then use this information and use this system to mitigate risk that exists and create opportunities for ourselves as marketers. Thank you for listening. We're going to go through some takeaways very briefly, and then we're going to open it up to any questions. So while we're going through these takeaways, if you'd like to be writing any questions in the chat box, we will get to them as soon as we can. So the first takeaway is something that Linda touched on earlier, which is that social listening, if leveraged correctly, means that you have the structure in place to be able to listen to this drumbeat before it hits the headline. It's not just to do with risk and crisis preparation, it's just as much in terms of discovering these niche markets before they become large trends. Being able to understand how products may perform across regions, genders, or interest groups.
We also want to make sure that we're focusing in on the few who drive most of the perceptions around the foods, the products you make, or the way in which you work. We can definitely isolate those individuals, and we can target those individuals by listening to them online and track when they're active and what they're talking about. I would conclude by saying we need to remember that it's important to know the difference between selling and telling. Many of us use online technologies and platforms for our selling work, but there is a very big learning in the Food 2020 work that marketing, traditional marketing, is rejected by the very few food evangelists who are driving most of the perceptions. They don't believe in it. They are skeptical of it. They believe it's intended to change their opinion, so they reject all forms of traditional marketing and communication. So utilizing our ability to listen more and to engage more on a relationship basis online is crucial for the food evangelists, for you to not only understand them, but for you to build their confidence, their trust, and win them over to help them help you. They believe they are stakeholders in your business, not target audiences. And I believe very confidently that through our work and through the work of Brandwatch, you have many different tools to be able to connect with them on a real-time basis and build true partnerships with them. I thank you for listening. I hope we can answer some questions. There is one comment that I did see that someone said, why are they not well informed, this food evangelist? I will tell you it's because they reject most of what traditional communicators are sending, selling, and sharing. They're looking for information in places where most marketing firms and brands are not participating. They're going to places like pop culture, Hollywood, books, entertainment, because they don't believe that what is being offered through traditional channels fits them, nor can it be believed. They have so little trust. And if they don't trust you, and they don't hear you, and they don't see you, they become misinformed. Do we have other questions out there?
We do. So our first question is actually probably suited for Hannah. It talks about the unbranded analysis that you mentioned, Hannah. The question is, what about unbranded conversations of your brand followers that aren't directly related to your product or service? How do you use social listening to uncover insights about their conversations to inform your other strategies, such as social and content, et cetera?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So that is something that social listening platforms, most of them, I mean, I know Brandwatch can do. So being able to look at what your followers, so finding these followers, once you have a list of their social handles, you should be able to put them into a social listening platform and actually create an open query that's going to be capturing everything that they're talking about. So that's going to bring you, so we could do this with food evangelists. If we were able to capture, like we do for some of our clients, lists of these people, it's a process that needs to be constantly expanding because these people are constantly popping up every day and they don't just talk about one particular issue, they talk about lots of things. So doing that broad listening of just what this group of people are saying is absolutely possible in a social listening platform and can be very beneficial. The trick there, one of the things is that social listening platforms normally let you random sample these mentions too. So obviously that's a lot of data. So you don't want to be overwhelmed with billions and billions of conversations. You're never going to get any insight. Being able to random sample is also super important.
Okay, our next question is one for Linda. Is it possible for someone to convert from the general population or the food involved section to being a food evangelist or vice versa?
Absolutely. These are opinions and passionate feelings that tend to bubble up. Some people are driven to doing this 24/7. Others just have a singular passion point that inspires them to get very busy and very engaged. I personally have a daughter-in-law who fits that profile. She's your average consumer most of the time, but there are certain passion points that she gets very agitated about and very active. And frankly, she is leading the conversation in some of those areas. So one can easily flip from one to the other at any given time. And that's a really great observation, by the way. Thank you for raising it.
Okay, our next question is, do you regard Twitter then as one of the leading platforms for greater interaction and audience recognition compared to the other social networks? And that's one that you both can probably take.
Yeah, I'll jump in with a very quick thought on that. I think yes, but it really depends what you're trying to do. As I said earlier, if target audience is women, and if you're, then Pinterest will be important for you. So different social networks are good for different types of things. So it depends what you're trying to do. But yes, Twitter is very good to increase levels of engagement.
I would say that platforms like Twitter, Pinterest, WeChat, others tend to attract concern over positive comments more frequently. I think this is where you get that urgent sort of reaction to an issue, an idea, a thought, a situation, and you're typically going to pick it up there and escalating there very quickly. We also know in our world at Ketchum that Twitter absolutely drives headline news. So if you want to know what the headlines are going to be in the general media in the next 30 to 40 minutes to an hour, go look on Twitter, and that will tell you exactly what the reporters are reporting.
And then I think we have time for just about one or two more. So do you suggest working with food evangelists similar to how we would work with bloggers or influencers?
Yes and no. I think that we've begun to, as a community and as a business, learn to better embrace our bloggers and food bloggers as part of our ecosystem and embrace them as not only people we're trying to market to, but market with. I think that the evangelist is a little bit different. I would actually treat them the way you would treat an NGO. It's like an NGO without an organization. These are individuals who feel that they need to form a partnership with you. They don't want to be bought. They don't want to, they're not in it for profit, not at all. They want to be heard. So I would encourage you to embrace them the way you have embraced bloggers, but embrace them on slightly different terms. Hear them, listen to them, respect them, engage them. Give them feedback that you've listened and you've made changes. What they're looking for is continuous improvement. They're looking for their impact making a difference. It doesn't mean they're going to hold you to the wall if you don't do the things they ask. They're actually very appreciative of just being heard and being kept informed. But they want to be taken very seriously. So they're slightly different than those bloggers who are looking for content. These are individuals who are looking for change and a relationship.
Okay, thank you. And then one final question before we drop. And this one is probably better for Hannah. You may follow several Twitter accounts. How can you follow all consumers' accounts?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure I have the answer to that one now, actually. We can use, a lot of our clients use Brandwatch to identify influencers. So being able to look at people who are tweeting most about GMO, for example, how frequently these people talk, how many followers they have, what's their reach score, and look at that across different networks. So you can definitely find people and then follow them. I would be happy to brainstorm offline about how we would follow all consumer accounts if you would like to reach out to me.
Okay, so as I said, we are at the top of the hour. I want to thank everyone for attending, and thank you, Linda and Hannah, for your thoughts and your presentation. And if we didn't answer your question, we will follow up with you offline. Once again, we did record the session, and we will be sending out the recording and the slides within a day or so. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.
And thank you to our partners at Brandwatch. We appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Ketchum. Thanks, Linda. Bye, everyone.